Okay, so my name's Jeff Maxwell. A little bit about me. I've been programming for a lot of years, 25 plus years now. It keeps going up every year, can't stop it. And I'm currently the security architect at Inspire Brands, which owns Sonic, Arby's, Buffalo Wild Wings, several different restaurant companies, and do a lot of secure coding and secure code practices there. I also adjunct teach at OCU. So if you have any questions about those, you can reach out to me offline. So there's been a lot of evolution over time for .NET, and especially this last year. So we had .NET 1, and it went through .NET 4, and around time .NET 4, they started .NET Core 1, 2, 3. They skipped 4 for .NET Core, and then they brought it all back together in .NET 5. And this is kind of where Blazor fits into that mix. I gave a talk on Blazor about 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, not too long after it was released. So it was in June. Blazor WebAssembly had been released actually in 2020, but it was early on in 2019 when they were still preview bits. It was released full on with 3.1, and then it was also now a part of .NET or Core, or it's not .NET Core anymore, it's just .NET 5, and will be going on forward. And there's actually been quite a bit of performance improvements and enhancements in .NET 6, and there's some pretty exciting things coming out in .NET 6 we'll touch on. Their new release cycle, if you haven't seen it, is the even numbers going forward. So 6 is going to be a long-term release, a long-term supported release. So it'll be available for 3 years. So every even number will be that long period. But everything from here forward, Blazor is now a part of that core infrastructure. Okay. So some of the things about Blazor and why it's good. It was started by Steve Sanderson several years ago as kind of a test with WASM. Could he load it in WebAssembly kind of for a preview? And then Dan Roth and the .NET team got a hold of it, and now it's part of the core product. So going forward, it will always be a part of .NET. There's both client-side and server-side rendering, and we'll take a look at both of those. You have access to the .NET stack, so you can do full stack development in C# on the front end of your site and the back end. And all browsers support it, or any browser that supports WebAssembly, including mobile browsers, can do that. And it's actually faster than JavaScript. So the two really versions that we'll take a look at is server-side Blazor, which has a list of Razor components that you build in the UI, and then it creates a signal R connection, and it modifies the DOM. So you make a change, it goes back, makes the calls to the back end, and then comes back forward, and then changes just the document object model necessary to change that, kind of like what you do with JavaScript, just changing those type of things that you need. So let's take a look at that real quick. So the server-side Blazor, and a lot of these I already have kind of created the item so we don't have to watch it spin up. Open with 2019. So you'll have to use Visual Studio 2019. I'm using the Community Edition, and you'll have to have .NET 5 installed, or you can have the .NET 6 preview. I think they're on preview 4 now, so you can have the preview build for that. So let's load this up, and then we'll go through it. And you've probably seen this exact same demo if you've built an app with MVC or with Angular or React. It's the same application that they have over and over again, and then I'll show a couple of modifications to it. So let's go ahead and spin that up, get that started up so we can take a look at the code. On. It's time for a new laptop. I didn't realize how slow my laptop was until I worked at home, and I don't go get coffee as much, I guess. Come on. While that's loading, I'll take a look at the code here. So in the application, we'll see if that spins up here a second. It's really slow. Okay, let's take a look at the code while we're loading. So you still have your startup, your program files like you've had before, app settings. So if you're building a server-side application or website, it's very, very similar. Some of the differences you have are these Razor pages. And if you're not familiar with Razor pages, it's kind of a self-contained page. So we'll look at the counter page because that's the one that they use. Yeah, so it came back up. So if I click on counter and I'm clicking this button, it's just counting up and it's going and making a call back to the back end via SignalR and then increasing that count. So the code to run that, oops, wrong one. The code to run that is you have a router. So in a Razor page, you define the route by which page I want to go to. So anytime I go to /counter, that's where it's going. In the HTML itself, I just have 3 lines. I have a header, and then I have a current count. So this variable, anytime you see this @ sign, it's looking up for a variable. Scroll over so you can see the whole link here. And then I have a button which the on-click event is increment count. There's this increment count in the method here, and it just increases that local variable. So as I click that button, it just continues to increase and count. So what it's doing is that's actually on the server side, but it's making that call back and forth to get that change. It's running this code on the server. It's making that call for me in the DOM, and it makes that change live in the website. So I don't see that flashing of the screen. I'm not seeing, a flash return, return, return. Same thing with like a fetch data. It's loading this weather data, which is just mocked data. But if I go back and look at the weather data, very similar type of thing. I have this fetch data, Razor. We'll go to the code first. It's making a call, this forecast variable. And this is the interesting thing is I have a shared, I can have shared objects. Looking here in the data. We'll look at this more in detail, but I have a forecast. It just has a date, time, and summary. If you look at the weather service, it's just randomly creating some numbers, and it's creating 5, doing a range from 1 to 5, and it's creating this random data to put it back to me. So it makes a call. It's making a call back and forth. And then here in the code, I'm just making that call to that service, get that async, and then in the code, in the HTML, you can do some things like if forecast is null, so you can have a loading. So it'll just show the loading until it has data. So it won't try to go, it won't just have a blank screen necessarily, but it has that loading, and then it comes back with the data. Here's the table, and then I can loop through the data inside the code. So for each forecast in forecast, which forecast is an array of that forecast object, and then I can print out the variables anytime I have this @ forecast, and you have IntelliSense, so I can do dot, and yeah, there you go, dot, and see the different attributes of temperature, temperature F, those type of things. So it has the full IntelliSense, but what it's doing is it's doing that communication back and forth each time. So I'll launch Fiddler here for a second, and we'll take a look at some of the traffic in a little bit. So this is all the same that we presented about 2 years ago. So if you're familiar with Razor pages, or if you're not, that might be a good topic for someone to speak more on. But it's something that Microsoft had added several years ago of kind of an alternative to MVC. And you can do these Razor pages. They're self-contained pages, and you basically can now build a Blazor app like you had done any of these Razor pages before, and everything works. But now I'm just communicating back and forth to the DOM via that SignalR. And this was a very popular thing, and it was actually released in the .NET 3 version, and then the WASM one was released later. But you can do this and change this pretty easily. And towards the end of the talk, if we have time, I'll show you how to take an existing MVC page and add a server-side call for this Razor page. But that's not too exciting. This has been out there for a while. One of the things a lot of people want to do is I want to return 50,000 records. So I'm going to stop this. I'll start it up again. I want to return 50,000 records to my screen. Now, that's not a good idea. Probably don't want to do this, but let's see what happens if I do. So I'll spin this back up. And just like anything else, it's going to try to build this on the server and then send that up to the client. And it's going to build out that DOM. So it's going to try to put, since I'm rendering it as a table row, it's going to try to render that many table rows in the HTML. So let's pull this up. And I'm going to open the dev tools so we can take a look at it. Go to elements. Yeah. So there's my page. Now it's in HTML mode. I'll do fetch data. And it's actually pausing because it's trying to go do that. If I look at the network, it's actually making a call back, but it's sitting there spinning, loading. It's thinking, but it's going to take some time because it's trying to go to the server, get those 50,000 records and come back. And I don't know how long that was, but it seemed like an eternity of how long that was. So if I click here and then focus on one of these items, it's going to take a second because it's a very large DOM. It finds this item here, and if I take a look at how many table rows, I can keep scrolling. It's trying to build out that entire DOM in my page, and it actually doesn't return everything. If I come down here to the bottom, it gives up after about 500 and says, okay, I can show the 4,000 or 49,500. I can show the rest of them if I want. And so what they're trying to do is, since I'm now just injecting into the DOM, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to inject 50,000 records. I mean, they're all here. I can scroll. It's there, but that's not very efficient. So they added a play, and let me see how the timing does this. I have a fetch data virtualize. I click on that, and it's already there. I mean, it already rendered a couple of seconds. And what's interesting or different about this is if I click back on that focus, let me click back on that row, you can see I only have 20 or 25 records here. And if we look at this very first one, it's on today's date, 2021, 6/8, or actually tomorrow, 6/8/2021. I scroll down, it's replacing, now I'm at 11/7/21, but I still have the same number of elements in the list. So it's virtualizing those documents or that return, and it's not loading, it's not trying to feed it all into the DOM all at once. So it has all the data and it's stored on the server side, but it's only sending to the client what data I am currently looking at. Okay, so that was a much more efficient and much faster way of doing it. So let's take a look and see what that difference was. So that was the fetch data virtualize. And really, it's the same code. Instead of doing a for loop, I just do virtualize items, and I give it the collection of items that I want, forecast, and then the context is forecast. So for every row, it's going to load a forecast object. And so by just changing that for loop to use this virtualize, I can increase the performance of my pages tremendously if I want, if I'm trying to load a ton of records. Now, like I said, I don't recommend doing 50,000 records. I don't recommend probably doing much more than a couple of hundred records at a time and doing paging. And you can do that too, since it's a server side. You could probably do some of those paging options. And what you can do is you can also, they have within the virtualize, you have a couple of different concepts. You can add, I think it's item content. And so you can see what the item content is. And then the, was it pin? No, sorry. Remember the placeholder. So you're gonna have a placeholder. So I can say placeholder here, and then I have 4 TDs, so TD loading, for each one of them. So instead, as it's loading, if I'm scrolling faster than it can load, I can have this placeholder that would show for those items as I'm loading. Okay, so there's different things you can do there to make that better. Okay, so that's one of the new things, and this is actually part of .NET 5 that they're rolling into the Blazor components, and you can use these Blazor components to do that virtual paging. Another thing that talk about, I'll spin that back up, is session storage. So I'm running on the server. I'm running a server app. Well, what if I need to store something in the local storage or session storage? I don't want to have to keep round tripping, sending things back and forth. I want to store some of that data in my local storage. Let's see if I can load that. So my browser storage here, if I do that, I have local storage and session storage. But if I copy this and open a new browser, go to browser storage. The local storage has 7 because it stored it, and the session storage is back down to 0. And let's go to browser tools here. Let's take a look at that. So that's going to be in the application. And then you have the local storage and session storage. So the local storage, it has that. And what's really nice is it encrypts it for me. So I can't even see what that is. That's a lot larger number than 7, but it's encrypting it for me. If I go back to, let me go click these a couple of times to increase it. And now you can see I have my session storage, and it also has that value. Now, if I go to, say, counter, and then I go back to the other counter, the browser storage, you can see it still stores that 11 and 4 for my session. Right? And if I go back to this other page, it still says 7, 7, but if I go to counter and then come back to it, now it says 11 because I don't have it automatically refreshing. I have to leave the page and come back because when I load it, I'm loading in the on load. I could have a refresh, if I needed to, but you can see each one of those. So let's take a look at that code. So this is nice. Like I said, this is running on the server, but I'm setting client sessions. So it's very similar to the counter. I just created 2 counters this time. And the first thing I had to do was I had to inject these 2 sessions. So I had to inject protected local storage and protected session storage. And the protected part of it is the fact that it encrypts it and decrypts it for you. You don't have to know keys. You don't have to do that kind of stuff. They can't see what your keys are, and you can have that encrypted for your information. Now, they did change something from the original Blazor that I had shown 2 years ago to now, is they now have an imports razor file, and this is where all your imports are. You notice there weren't any imports in each individual page, but there's imports here, and this is where I got that protected browser storage. So I added the ASP.NET components, server, protected browser storage, and so that is storing or pulls in the appropriate items. And so you don't have to have this in each one of your pages necessarily anymore, because you now have this reference in one place, and this imports, it's underscore imports. I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but it's underscore imports .razor. Okay, so you bring that in, and then once I have that, I can make a call in the initialize. So in the increment, every time I increment, I'm saying I want to set a value. I give it a string, either local or session, and I give it the number. And then when I'm reading it in I do the same type of thing. I'm reading in and get async, and then local or get async, and then session. I'm saying that's going to be an integer, so it's casting that. Now it's a little bit different return type. It's not just an integer. So I will have a couple of attributes, one being success and then the value. So I can check, did I get a successful return? So if I try to read it and it's not there, then I want to set that value to 0. Okay. So if it is there, then I want to go ahead and read that value into my variable. Okay. So this is kind of a nice thing that, like I said, a lot of times you would have to store the session on the back end and pass that session back and forth to the back end every time and keep track of if you're just doing server-side code. But this allows you to actually store sessions either in a local storage, which will persist every time I open and close the browser, or in a session storage that will be unique per browser tab or per browser. Okay. So that kind of concludes a little bit what I want to talk about on the server side. Let's go back to the slides real quick. And let's talk about the client. So the client side Blazor is a part of WebAssembly, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But it downloads a WASM file and any needed DLLs and actually runs in the browser. So 3-4 years ago, the standard came out with something called WebAssembly, where you can actually run in a protected sandbox different applications. And so lots of different companies started adding things into it. And actually some of the more famous ones that are out there today is Unity. You can actually run Unity games and publish Unity games in the browser via WASM. Also, I think Autodesk and some of those where you can actually see and manipulate, actually CAD drawings in the browser. And then TensorFlow and some of their workflows have done that. And so after that, a lot of companies started jumping on the bandwagon, and lots of different companies have done it. So you can actually go to webassembly.org and see all the specifics. And it's a binary standard for portability of code and programs to run in the confines of the browser. And some people say, well, I've been fooled by Microsoft before. I bought into Silverlight, and I was one of those people that bought into Silverlight. How is this different from Silverlight? Well, Silverlight was actually a plugin that the browser had to support. But WASM is basically a way of publishing, and kind of the way that JavaScript works today. And it's a way of publishing that in there. Publishing this WASM file, so it doesn't care what language it is, because it's compiled down to this assembly file, and then it can do whatever it can within the confines of that sandbox. So let's take a little bit of a look at that. And I have started up here my fiddler because I want to watch the traffic, and I'll filter to localhost. I'll I clear all that out. Close. That's the client server one. Okay. Yeah, so this one is just the client. So the first one was just the server side. This one is just doing the client. And these are all out of the box tools. If you have Visual Studio today, you can do new project, and there's going to be several different ones for Blazor. The first one was the server side. This one's the client side, and then we'll look at the client server combination. And if I run this, it's going to run the exact same demo, and this is the out of the box demo. But I want to show here is once it starts running, it's going to download. It's going to be sending DLLs and the WASM file down to the browser. So hopefully it'll start rolling in here. So start it up. Where are we? Okay, so there's a local host, and then it starts downloading different things. Let's see what we got here. So it's the Blazor at WebAssembly.js to kind of link things together. And then you see, hey, I have a WASM DLL. It's actually publishing a DLL. It's compiled it and it's published that out to the website, which is kind of really interesting. It's going to publish lots of other things, probably doing the check back. There you go. And then it has, and the PBD, so I can actually debug in the browser. And then here's all the other assemblies. It's sending components, it's sending metadata, configuration, file providers, logging. It's sending all these DLLs actually down to that little sandbox of code. And so, like, I can do the counter again. I can do the counter. It's in the browser. So I'm running in the confines of the browser. It's not going back to the server. It's not, I don't have to do those type of things anymore. Here's the same kind of thing that I had done with the UI. So that's what's interesting to me, is it actually sends all these DLLs down and it's running in that sandbox, and it has that WASM file, and I can actually filter just on the WASM. It's that machine code. So it's actually sending out that machine code and downloading that to the server or to the browser, and that's what's running inside of that. And then that WASM file, that DLL, includes other DLLs that it needs. Okay? So kind of an interesting concept. And the code's exactly the same. So I'm not writing any different code, whether I'm doing that server-side Blazor or the client side. That's the same exact code that we had before, and so with the fetch data and the other. Now the one difference is this fetch data, since it's local, I'm pulling from a sample data.json that I published with the application. So you can actually load JSON files, or you can load whatever you want into the browser if you want, if you need. If you want to do some things offline, and that's what's great about the client side, is you can be completely offline. If they load your application and I load some initial data, then I can take it offline. I would drop this call if I did that, but I could take it offline and actually still manipulate that data, because this is looking for this JSON locally. So the scenario there is you could be caching local files into the client workspace, that client sandbox, and doing offline work if you wanted. Now, it is limited. I believe it's 5 megabytes that your application has or has to live inside of, or can take up. And a lot of tools that clear up your disk space are really bad about, deleting all your browser caches and deleting all your browser space, that a given application has taken. So you could lose the data that way. But in the scenario where I am on, I can check to see, am I online? Yes, I am. I'll go download this data and I'll write it into a JSON file locally in that client, and then they could work offline. Great for a mobile scenario. Okay, so that's the WASM. That's just the client side. I don't have any server-side code here. I can actually publish this to a folder. It actually creates this web folder here, and I could publish this to, there's that sample data. I could publish this to a folder and then take this file and publish it out on a AWS or even a Azure blob storage and run it from there. I don't have to have a server to do that. So that's kind of that JavaScript scenario where, like either with Angular or React or Vue, where I can take just the JavaScript, package it up, and publish it to a like a CDN. So you could do this exact same thing that with this front end. You could do that kind of a scenario. Okay. So let's take a look at both scenarios. So the last one, and this is the one I had, is the client and server. So if we look at this code has both the client code and the server and the controllers. So the controller here, and then it has shared. So the nice thing about this, and it looks like, I don't know why that's unavailable, but the nice thing here is now I can share this class between both client and server. So here's that weather forecast class. It can be shared by both the client and the server, because I don't have to build, I don't have to build one class or one model in different ones. I can share the exact same model. one of the challenges that I've had, or where I get a lot of code, is I build my models in .NET on the back end, and then I build my models in React or Angular on the front end, in JavaScript or TypeScript, and then I'm constantly have to keep those in sync. And if I add a field on the back end, I have to add a field on the front end, and they kind of get out of sync. What's nice about having the client server model where you have both of them is I can reuse this class in both the front end and the back end.
So Jeff has got a couple of questions come up. Is this
Sure.
a good time? There's one just now.
This,
what is
great point.
Okay.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
What is the difference between these DLL files and common DLL files on Windows? What do they do on the front end?
Say that again.
What is the difference between these DLL files and common DLL files on Windows?
So these are, so these are the DLLs that are part of the .NET package or framework for .NET 5. So the change over time was, .NET framework 4.8 is probably the latest and the last one they had there. And the .NET Core dropped all the Windows specific DLLs. So, and now they've kind of brought it all back together. So the way this works is I'm only going to be sending the DLLs that I need to the browser that, will, for rendering or for JSON manipulation or to make HTTP calls. I'm only sending the DLLs necessary to make those calls. So kind of the whole point of .NET Core was to break away from this heavy set of DLLs and only build them out the ones that you need and then send that to it. Now, what we've heard from what they're trying to do in .NET 6 and going forward, they're even, since all these packages and these DLLs are open source anyway, they're going to do what's called tree shaking, where they're going to actually go through and only create that assembly with the calls that you make. So if I am not using any HTTP calls, then it's not going to include that library going forward. So it's going to even be a smaller, more compact deal. The DLLs that you have in like a 4.8 are designed just to work on Windows. And so this whole transformation of .NET Core and now the reconnection of .NET 5 are bringing back the framework and the core together. They now have done that. So instead of having it all into one DLL or all in one package, you just get the DLLs that you need to build your system. So if you're building a web page or a Windows page, or we'll talk about here, mobile, you only get the packages and the DLLs you need. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, let us know in the chat if you have more questions along those lines. There was another question when you're showing us the code for the server example. There's a virtualized component. Can you give a little bit more details on what exactly that is?
Sure, let me open that back up. So the virtualized component is a component that Microsoft built for us. Just like any of the custom components that you can build yourself, it follows kind of that HTML and it wraps the area and does that virtualization for you. So since we're running on the server and we're communicating with that browser front end, it's taking and making those calls for us. So let's take a look at this virtualize. So this is a component that Microsoft has built that you can pass in a collection and then the context, and it will do that virtualization of those pages for you. And you can actually control how much virtualization you want, how many pages before and after. So it's building this for you, and then you just have to wrap your code and it does all the magic for you. So instead of you having to go say, well, give me a little bit more data, give me a little bit more data, it's streaming that data up to you instead of sending you all 50,000 records at once. And this is not just specific to Blazor. This also works now in MVC and just normal Razor pages. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, let us know in the chat if you have any other questions, but I think that's all for right now. I'll interrupt you again if there are any others come up.
Okay, thank you. So let me show an example I put together. It's not just the stock example of some little bit of coding here. So last time I did the presentation, I had built on someone else's example that they had done where they were loading the Game of Thrones characters and being able to search. So they showed how to build that out, I believe in Angular, and then I showed how to build it out in Blazor. And so I wanted to kind of do something similar. So let's see if I can run this, see if it can compile. Sometimes a few things take a little bit of time. Loading out. So I'll go ahead and run this example to get it started. But I'm using the client side Blazor and the server side. So I'm going to make calls to the API backend and then return that to the client. And I wanted to create some components. So the other nice thing about Blazor is I can create my own components. We saw that virtualized component that Microsoft gave us, but we can build our own components to make our code more modular and for better reuse. So let's see if that spins up. Still spinning. And so what I did is I went out to rapidapi.com, where you can just search for APIs, weather APIs, any API that you want, and then download a given API and use that. They give you a subscription key, and so you can use it to your heart's content. So it just gives me what this API does. It gives me a random list of superheroes, and then I wanted to build that out. So it's loading my page. Okay, here's my heroes. It's loading my heroes. It's making that call out to that API. We'll see how slow that is. Yeah, so it loaded out all my people here with the images, and then I can filter. So it took a little bit of time to make that call and get this data and load it in my screen. So I don't want to do that again. So the scenario is I want to say, I want to look for Chuck Norris. Of course, he's a superhero. You know, so it's filtering on that list as I type. So it's not going back to the server. So it got the data from the server, and now that's able to search that in using .NET locally. So let's take a look at kind of how that works. So in the server side, it's a typical client-side server here. I have a superhero API. And then I'm just passing in some logging, and then I'm doing a superhero get service. I have an interface and then a service. The interface is just the call to the get, and then the backend service is where I actually do the work, where I'm reading in, making a call. I'm setting that hero's URL, which is what the Rapid API gave me, and I'm also reading from the configuration files the key and host name. Can change, and each time you register, they're going to give you a key and host name. So I'm creating that, adding that to the headers, and then I'm making a call to that. I'm reading that in as async, and I'm deserializing that into JSON as a list of heroes, and then I'm returning that back. So the back end is similar to any other back end calls that you would make. There's different ways to skin the cat, but I use the send async so I could pass in the header information. So that's really the server side. It's nothing too fancy. But then I created this heroes razor page. And so the path is /, so it's at the root of the path. And then I do that check to see if the heroes are null. I want to say loading. Else I'm going to call hero list, and I'm going to pass in heroes. Okay. So this is a component that I created called hero list. Okay. And so on the initialization of the page, it makes a call, does a get from async, it makes a call back to the server of superhero. Since they're hosted together, both the client and the server, I don't have to give it a path. It makes that call to that API and returns and gets this hero list. So let's look at the hero list. And once again, it's just HTML. So I have an HTML, I created a search box at the top, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. And then I created a div, and I'm just looping through this for. Now I could use that virtualized, but I'm just looping through these heroes, hero, and then filtered heroes. Okay. So my filtered heroes, what I'm doing is when I'm loading this page, I'm saying my filtered heroes equal, and I'm doing the comparison of the name if it contains whatever's in that search box. Okay. So as they type, it's continuing to filter this list as I type, because it runs this code, it has that link together, okay? And so then inside of my loop, then I have another one called hero card. I've created another sub component, my own component, and I have a superhero. And sorry. So this was the hero list. You can see I pass a parameter. I'm getting a parameter of that hero array. So on the first page, where I'm passing in this heroes array, this is what it's going to bind to this parameter here. Okay. So it ties into that parameter of my hero. And then I can do a hero card, pass in superhero, pass in each individual hero as it loops through. And then the hero card just has some HTML and then has the small image for the avatar, the name, their any alter egos, and then their place of birth. There's lots of other attributes. I can add some additional attributes if I want. Super hero dot parents dot, I can do their height, their height is, yeah, stuff like that. So I can add additional attributes as I want and change out that card. Okay, so, and I can use this card anywhere I want, anywhere that I can use this line right here. As long as I pass in a hero, it will build out that visualization for me. Okay, and then the same thing with the hero list. I'm just passing in the return. All right, I could have put the search over here, but I wanted the list and the search to be together. So the way the search works is a couple of different things. Now, this did change from an earlier version. I can bind to a variable, and so it's binding to this local variable here, search term. So as things change, it's modifying the search term, which I also use here in that filter, this link query that filters out the data. Okay, and then I can say, okay, I want to trigger this, I want to bind to this event on input. So this will fire this binding every time you change that input. So that's new in the later versions of Blazor. I'm not quite sure when they worked that in, but this is the way that you can capture an event on an object, or like an input box or a drop down or a button or something like that. You can trigger on that event and then send that binding down. Okay. So with a few lines of code, I'm able to do that. But what's really great, I think, when you're doing these type of things is this shared library, right? So here are all the classes. I went ahead and made the call to the API in rapidapi.com, took that JSON return, went out to JSON to C#, and it created all these classes for me. So it gave me these classes. I have a hero class, and the hero class has name. Then it has another class called power stats, appearance, biography, work. You know, it has, and then the images. And then so if you look at the images, there's extra small, medium, large. So it has different size of images that you can use in your code. Same thing with biography. It has the full name, alter egos, birthplace, first appearance, all that kind of information. So I didn't have to build this out. And what's great is I don't have to, it's shared between both my client side and my server side, right? So I didn't have to map into a JSON object to then have it available and do validation on the client, okay? So that's kind of a little bit better example. And I'll publish all of this to my GitHub and send everybody, or make sure everybody has a link on that. I want to close. I don't need that one anymore. So I have a few more things. I'm always running on low on time. There's lots of fun stuff we can do. So, and I actually, with my wonderful PowerPoint skills, you know, what if you have an existing MVC page? You know, I built all these apps in .NET Core MVC or MVC. You know, do I have to start over? And the answer is no. So let's take a look at that example. So I've already pre-baked it because there's quite a few things that you have to do. Yeah, this is the MVC one. But I want to kind of show what you would have to do. So you can take your existing application, your existing MVC app, and start adding in the server-side Blazor calls. So if I want start converting a few pages a little bit at a time, you can start doing that by plugging this into your existing MVC apps. So this is, once again, just a .NET or a new MVC app straight out of the box, and it gives you, like I said, you've probably seen this before. It gives you a home controller. It gives you some views, and your view, you have the index page and some shared pages like that. But what you need to do to add in the Blazor code, the first thing is there's a dependency packages. There's a package called, let me scroll this over so you can see it. There's a package called Microsoft.ASP.core MVC Razor Runtime Compilation. So I'm adding, and you can actually do this and bring in regular Razor pages, but so that it, like if you're using like .NET watch run at the command line, it'll actually hook in and recompile as you build that out. So that's one of the first packages that you would include. You would actually include that here. Let's scroll down. So in your startup, I have to add this Razor. After I've included that package, then I have to add to the services Razor runtime compilation. So now it'll compile those Razor pages, and then I want to add server-side Blazor. Okay. So I don't have to add any packages for that. That's now part of the .NET Core 5. So I can just say I want to add in Blazor or server-side Blazor. And then down in the routes, I just have to say I want to do endpoints .map Blazor hub. And this sets up that SignalR. I don't know if you've worked with SignalR in the past. I have, and it can be rather challenging to get the SignalR stuff set up. Microsoft's made it easier over time, but it can still be a challenge. But that piece of it gets that SignalR thing hooked up. And then because I'm going to be using Blazor, I have to, in the root, I have to create this underscore imports.razor file. And it's going to have the same imports. And then the last one, so these are the same imports that any of them have had in the past. But then I'm also going to add one that references the current project. So this project is named C# -demo -MVC Blazor, but it converts to underscores. So I have to add that so it sees that. And then in the views, and there's a couple of different steps here. The views on their layout at the very top, I'm going to add this base href. So I'm doing href tilde to say this. Basically, Blazor uses this to find the root of this object. So it finds this root object and say it's going to start from here. If you have a different path to your website that say it's /Jeff is the root of your website, you would add the /Jeff in there. And then the secret sauce is this right here. And we didn't talk about this when we were talking about the server-side Blazor because it automatically gets included. But you actually are sending this JavaScript, and this JavaScript's what's hooking things together. This underscore framework blazor.server.js. And you're saying, well, I don't have that folder. Well, that's part of the .NET. It injects this in it for you. So I don't have to worry about that. It's actually adding this for me, and it's part of the package when it sends it. But I have to add that, and I do need to add it before I render any other scripts. So I need to make sure that it's out there before any of the other scripts are run. Okay. So once I have all of that, then I can go here to the counter, and that's the exact same counter code that we had before. And now I have a client-side, or sorry, a server-side Razor page running. So let's go ahead and try that. And I think I added one more. I may have added to the menu, wherever the menu is in Razor. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I put it on the index page. There was one more piece. So rendering, since this is an AS, let me see if it works real quick. And then we'll go on because we're dangerously out of time. We'll pretend that goes ahead and works. So I wanted to show the last piece of it is I do component, render mode, server side, pre-rendered, and then I give it a type of counter, which is the name of that Razor page. Okay, so that's going to pre-render it. I'll go ahead and publish this as a standalone example, so you'll be able to see that, and I'll put some comments of things to add. I'll do some added items there. Okay, yeah, there's the counter, and now it's doing that server side, but presenting it in the client without refreshing the page. Okay, and then if I had gone to different pages, see how it refreshes it in a normal MVC. So let me run through my last few slides, and we didn't get to all the demos, but what's next for that is Maui. Maui's coming in .NET 6, and it's a platform where you can actually build Windows, iOS, or Mac OS, iOS, and Android applications. The way to do that is you need to install, it'll be on the next line, you can create with this Blazor hybrid, the second line here. You can do this experimental Blazor mobile binding, which should be released in .NET 6, but you can do that hybrid. This is the command, and I'll put that in, it's in the slides, the .NET new, you're adding that experimental binding, and then what you can do is create a Android or iOS or Windows or Mac OS application using Blazor. So here's a list of links and different things where you can downloads, there's a workshop, there's some different things to try, and then this last link, they're having a Blazor Day in a couple of days. So next week sometime, June 17th, and it's a free event. You can go to blazorday.net. I don't know what all is going to happen there, but if you go to that website, you can register. It's free, and it seems like they're going to have several different experts talking about different topics. That's any questions? There's my GitHub. It's Jeff-Maxwell, or you can email me at jeff@tcnsolutions.com. That's my personal email. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. I know that I always go long on my presentations.
No, this one looks like we're right on time. So there was a question about converting JSON to a class, but I think that might be something separate to discuss later.
Yeah, so you can use Newtonsoft that's what I use to deserialize the object from into that. That might be a good topic of how to just do that on its own.
Yeah, I'd love to see that as maybe a lightning talk. So I think we may have a talk scheduled for next month, but then the month after that, I believe in August, we'll be ready for a lightning talk. So you also mentioned a talk on Razor. So I think we have several good topics here. Really appreciate you coming or speaking to us today virtually online. If